My name is Samantha Berg, and I work here at the National Center for Education Statistics, the Assessment Division. And I have the great honor today to introduce Linda Friedrich. She's going to be talking about her work, and her paper is entitled Working with the Developmental Strengths of Adolescent Learners to Build from Inexperience to Independence in Academic Literacies Across the Subject Areas. We welcome Linda, and she actually is the Director of Literacy at West Ed. There she serves as the senior researcher, and she's been there for almost 3 decades of experience leading literacy, professional learning, and producing tools for educators to improve practice, and especially for educators working in underserved communities. Linda also facilitates the ongoing growth and development of the nationally recognized Reading Apprenticeship program and leads West Ed's literacy portfolio. While at the National Writing Project, Linda served as the project director for the College Career and Community Writers Program, where she oversaw the development of instructional and professional learning resources focused on source-based argument and led the creation of the formative writing assessment resources for secondary teachers. Linda has also co-authored How Teachers Become Leaders, Learning from Practice and Research. This was published by the Teachers College Press in 2010. Linda's primary areas of expertise are scaling of evidence-based interventions, teacher professional learning, the role of formative assessment in supporting learning, and the role of literacy in supporting disciplinary learning at the secondary levels. We welcome Linda here this afternoon.
Thank you so much for joining my talk, Working with the Developmental Strengths of Adolescent Learners to Build from Inexperience to Independence. Today, I will be representing Reading Apprenticeship, a West Ed program of research, development, and service that focuses on improving academic literacy across subject areas. Our goal is to work with communities of educators to support the development of high-level academic literacy skills among diverse students, especially those who have not had access to rigorous literacy instruction. The plan for my presentation today is simple. I'm going to start out by identifying key aspects of the problem of declining reading proficiencies. Then I will focus on instructional approaches that work to engage adolescents' strengths. And finally, I will outline the supports necessary to make proven approaches work at scale. We are gathered here today because of the recent decline in NAEP 4th and 8th grade reading scores. However, this challenge, especially for secondary learners, is not a new one. About 15 to 20 years ago, there was a variety of research that showed between 35 and 50% of high school graduates were unprepared for the kinds of challenging texts that they would read in college or for the literacy demands of their professional careers. So, what is the nature of this challenge? First, there is real complexity and diversity of texts, and we encounter these as citizens, as workers, and in our education, whether that is in high school, college, or in our postgraduate work. So, where does this challenge come from? Why is it that we are seeing declines and continued low achievement for our adolescent learners? So one possible explanation is a motivational one. In 2018, TNTP published a report, The Opportunity Myth, that did a landscape analysis of what were the underlying challenges in students' reading. So aspirations were not one of those. Their work found that 94% of students aspire to attend college. Another non-explanation is time on task in school. Their observations of nearly 1,000 class periods found that 88% of the time, students were in fact working on class-related activities. Perhaps performance. Again, TNTP found that 71% of students received A's or B's on their assignments. So, at least on the face of it, they were experiencing success. However, when TNTP did a deeper analysis, they learned that only 17% of students were demonstrating grade level mastery on those assignments. So again, where is the challenge? It turns out that TNTP learned that students spent more than 500 hours per school year on assignments that weren't appropriate for their grade and with instruction that didn't ask enough of them. The equivalent of 6 months of wasted class time in each core subject. So apparently, a major part of the challenge lies in what we are asking of students and how we are engaging them in grade level work. We have found the same to be true when we turn specifically to the areas of middle and high school reading. My colleague Cindy Greenleaf, who is the co-founder of Reading Apprenticeship, along with Sheila Valencia, did some groundbreaking research about 5 years ago. And their findings really echo what TNTP found in general and applied them to literacy. Quote, "We found that although students were eager to participate in the projects, their knowledge about the actual content of the units remained embarrassingly thin. We realized that students weren't reading or weren't comprehending the texts." So in a nutshell, you had engaged, eager students, yet they weren't achieving grade level mastery. So again, what was the problem? Investigating this problem, we soon found that many subject area teachers had abandoned texts, teaching around them in many inventive ways. And again, I think this speaks to the central challenge that TNTP raised about not expecting enough. Greenleaf and Valencia learned that teachers would read the texts aloud to their students. They would create PowerPoint lectures that engage students in the content so that they were essentially giving the students the answers. None of this comes to a surprise to our students. They have abundant experience with low-level literacy tasks. They aren't engaged in disciplinary reading and reasoning. These two students' quotes, I think, really crystallize this challenge, expressed both by Greenleaf and Valencia as well as in the TNTP report. Erica, for example, says, "I'm going to be honest with you. I don't read the stuff. I just go back to the question. It'll tell me this word. And I'll be like, let me go back and find the word." So in a sense, the students are efficiently completing assignments. They look as though they are understanding because they are answering the questions and often answering them correctly, yet they aren't actually reading. So what's the impact of this teaching around the text and these low-level assignments? It leaves us in a situation where many of our secondary students come to us profoundly inexperienced and unprepared to engage in academic literacies, not because of their intelligence or their willingness to work, but because of the experiences that they had. At the same time, these students are not necessarily beginning readers. Often they can decode and read things out loud fluently, yet they aren't really grappling with and grasping the meaning of the texts. At Reading Apprenticeship, we, along with you and TNTP, believe that the vast majority of students are capable of engaging in rigorous reading and academic work with support. So what we have learned in our 25 years of work is that powerful reading instruction can have a positive impact, and this is reinforced by additional research. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of research and then take a look at what this might look like in a classroom. The opportunity myth, again, provides a very helpful frame for identifying the features of successful classrooms. Consistent opportunities to work on grade-appropriate assignments, strong instruction, and by strong instruction, they mean students doing most of the thinking, not the teacher. Deep engagement in what students are learning. And finally, students experiencing teachers' high expectations for them and a belief that students can meet grade level standards. The reading research, the most recent reading comprehension research also, I think, provides some nuance for us about what this looks like for adolescent literacy. IES funded the Reading for Understanding initiative, and in 2019, a synthesis report, Reaping the Rewards, was published. And I'm going to highlight just a few findings from that. So here are some things that that report established about reading comprehension. First, knowledge of many kinds facilitates and builds from reading comprehension. So this says that the background knowledge that we bring helps us comprehend, and reading more helps us build knowledge. So there's a very important virtuous cycle embedded in this idea. Second, language drives every facet of reading comprehension. This includes lexical, morphological, grammatical, on that word and sentence level, and more broadly, it includes building an understanding of text structures and the specific discourses of our disciplines. This report also laid out some important understandings about the trajectory of reading development. I think many of us think about by third grade, we gain those foundational skills and then we read to learn. And of course, that's a bit of an overstatement. What this report really underscored is that students can and do learn to read as they read to learn. So again, it's setting up a reciprocal relationship. And finally, the report lays out the challenge and complexity of this work. Meeting these new demands of complex reading are inherently difficult, both for teachers and for our students. The report also emphasizes the role of well-orchestrated, multi-component instruction and how that can be effective. This kind of instruction emphasizes metacognition and its role in comprehension, engagement with texts and tasks, support comprehension. So again, going back to TNTP, that students are engaged in what they're learning. Collaboration is a key element. To tie back to the TNTP report, students are doing the work of the learning. And finally, reading comprehension interventions serve content area learning goals. So there's this real, you don't have to either teach literacy or your content. Both can happen at the same time. In these effective classrooms, here's what students are doing. They are actively and collaboratively constructing and extracting meaning from texts. They are using language in rich conversations about texts, and this helps them to sharpen and deepen their understanding. And finally, they put this knowledge to use in order to solve real problems, and real problems in the disciplines and their lives. Reading Apprenticeship was founded about 25 years ago by my colleagues Cynthia Greenleaf and Ruth Schoenbach. And they initially coined the metaphor reading apprenticeship to draw a parallel between what we as expert readers in our disciplines do with our students to the kinds of craft and technical apprenticeships that bring novices into the expert work of a craft or a profession. And at the core of this is metacognition, and making these things that normally are happening inside of our heads and are invisible, often to us as well as to our students, visible, really supports students in their growth as readers and as learners in the disciplines. Our framework has 4 dimensions that support metacognitive conversation. The first is the social dimension, where we create safety and create opportunities for students who are coming to us as inexperienced and often unconfident readers, where they can share their challenges and they can share their solutions. The personal dimension speaks to our students who come to us as non-readers, and how can we build that identity where students begin to see themselves differently and develop the metacognition and stamina and confidence to engage in the challenging texts that support their learning. The 2 other dimensions I think are more familiar to us as literacy instruction. So the cognitive dimension speaks explicitly to the kinds of skills and strategies that often form the core of literacy instruction, especially in the secondary grades. And that's important. What our framework suggests is that it isn't sufficient, that we also surround it with these other processes. And finally, the knowledge building dimension. And that's both the general knowledge we bring from the world, the deep disciplinary knowledge we have for our content areas, and then these aspects of language that the Reading for Understanding report surfaced. Metacognitive conversation ties all of these things together as students engage in extensive reading and a range of reading. I'd like to turn now to a video of a classroom from a 7th grade science class that is reading an article entitled Woolly Mammoth Resurrection. This classroom is in Union City, California, and at the time that this was filmed, about 55% of the students were eligible for free or reduced price lunch, and 27% were English learners. I'm going to pause periodically throughout the video to share with you some of the features of high quality engaged reading instruction that I notice.
I'm excited today because I have an article for you all to read that really is going to tie in a bunch of the things we've been learning about this year in class. I would like to do the first sentence with you before you start reading. And before I even begin, the first thing that stands out to me is that I noticed the date. It says 2005, and I think it's important to make a note of that, just so that was 10 years ago. I know I'm going to be reading a science article, and we've been learning about how scientists are usually trying to solve a problem. The first thing that comes to my mind is, if this was a problem they had 10 years ago, has there been progress made? And then this is a big thing that stands out here is resurrected species. I know I've heard the word resurrected in like a religious context, and I'm wondering how they're using it in science. And I'm thinking resurrected like bring back to life. And if they're talking about a woolly mammoth, I'm thinking, whoa, wow, is this possible? Are they talking about bringing back a woolly mammoth? Is that what this article is going to be about? And can they really do that? Did other things jump out to any of you when I read that sentence? Anything you think I should add on here? Marcus.
Like, I was just thinking like the animal's already dead and they're bringing it back. Like how are they doing it? They use DNA or something?
That's a good question, right? We're wondering how. How are they able to do this? So if you can just continue on your own reading this part. And I want you to remember our learning, one of our goals, that as you're working on this, that you need to do your individual work so that you'll have something to share with your group when it comes time, because you will be working as a group to share your thoughts out. Okay, so you're just going to read that.
So I'm going to pause us here, and this opening sequence is really a powerful model of how this teacher is apprenticing her students into scientific thinking. She first points out the date, And she raises a very scientific question about the date of the article. She notices that the article was written 10 years ago, and she wonders whether progress has been made, because that's what scientists do. They solve problems. She also initiates her students into the use of language in science, that use of the word resurrect. And she makes a connection to other meanings of resurrection. And then she models curiosity about the topic. Does this mean we can really bring back the woolly mammoth? How? She then also makes a very powerful move that builds the social and personal dimension of her classroom by inviting her students to share their questions and curiosities as well. And she dutifully writes down Marcus's question and talks about how that question about how would they do that as being an important scientific question. So let's go on to the next part of the video.
First section, you're talking to the text to make your connections and your questions. Okay, focus on connections and questions for that section. Okay, go ahead and put your pencils down. And just choose a couple of things that you think are important, some of your thoughts that you want to share with your group.
I wonder if they bring them back, like for be exactly the same as they were like 10,000 years ago. How the traits like spawned. No, because they delivered the traits to the regular elephant, so I wonder how it responds, like will it actually make a mammoth or a regular elephant? How are they going to get sperm from the dead woolly mammoth?
It's sort of morally wrong just because it already died off because of environment change, probably species being hunted down. And
so does that make you have questions about what this refuge would look like? Like what kind of things would the scientists need to consider when they're building this refuge?
What if the predator is still there? That's so cool.
It said the natural habitat of the mammoth will no longer exist.
The natural habitat doesn't exist, so what are they going to have to consider? So you're saying things like predators, what other things?
Considering that the problems why they died off could be from their environment.
I had a comment beside because I've noticed that scientists, they don't really never figure out something. They just like, if they do, like every time they figure it out, they have more questions to it. Like that's like what I.
So again, I'm going to pause the video, and there are several things that I notice about this. First and foremost, the text is not missing in action. The students are actively making meaning with this text. The second thing that I notice is that the students are working together collaboratively to share the questions and connections that they make. This is an active meaning-making process, and students are generating questions about the science. And finally, the teacher is a full participant in this classroom. While the students are doing most of the work of learning, which is what we would hope to see, the teacher is also playing an important role in asking questions that extend and push the small group conversations in new ways. So let's watch the end of the video.
Okay, so I heard lots of good thinking, and I want to hear some of the conversations you were having. If you can share out some of those questions that you had with your group, I want to write them up here in our class paper.
We're wondering if, because we learned from DNA, we know that they both get it from both parents, but if they're impregnating an elephant, then it's going to be half elephant, and we're wondering if that would intrigue with any of the research.
What else, Isabella?
When it says that if they revived it, they would find out why they went extinct, how would they find out like how they became extinct?
Okay, so you're wondering, just because they're alive again, how will that answer the questions of the past? Okay. Isaiah.
I was wondering, so if they put the sperm from the mammoth with the elephant, would it create, like, would the new type of species have an advantage than both of the other two species?
So you're wondering about this new offspring. Will it have new traits that are somehow an advantage? Okay. So on that note, we're going to go ahead and I want you to continue with your thinking and showing me your thinking on your paper. And so if you can read the next section.
So this final segment of the video, I think, really demonstrates this teacher's belief that her students are capable of doing grade level thinking and work. And that really speaks to that personal dimension of the Reading Apprenticeship framework. She captures their questions. It also speaks to the relationship between literacy and science learning. The students' conversations and the students' observations are very much generating the kinds of questions that scientists ask and answer and need to wrestle with as they do their work. Reading Apprenticeship has been around for 2.5 decades, and over that time we've had the opportunity to engage in a number of rigorous research studies. 5 of the randomized control trials that we have conducted have shown positive results. We've seen changes in teacher practice. We've seen improved reading comprehension scores and scores on other state-mandated exams. Importantly for students, we've seen increased learner identity and students using increased problem-solving strategies as they read. And finally, we've seen students be able to demonstrate disciplinary thinking with texts. So, what do we need to support this kind of teaching transformation at scale? And I'm going to talk a little bit in general about what we need and then share a couple of examples with you from Reading Apprenticeship's work. So the Reading for Understanding initiative, in addition to building new understanding about how reading comprehension takes place, it also focused on what is needed to support substantial shifts in teachers' practice. And I'm just going to read the final sentence of this quote to you. While students were learning new strategies, routines, and stances to become better learners, teachers were acquiring knowledge and routines to become better at scaffolding that student learning. What this report suggests is that professional learning is a necessary, if not fully sufficient, condition for accelerating our students' learning and to really create the kinds of classrooms in which students are taking responsibility for their own thinking and learning. Reading Apprenticeship has a well-developed professional learning approach. Our professional learning, like our classrooms, are very much apprenticeships. They are led by teachers and retired leaders, teachers who have extensive experience in teaching literacy in the context of their disciplines. Our professional learning approach really starts with us as experts in our own field and understanding what we do as readers to make sense of complex texts. So we read and we reflect on what are those things that we do to understand words that are challenging to us. We then take a step back and look at what was the instructional design in the professional learning that allowed us to surface that knowledge and to gradually understand complex texts. Finally, we provide support around designing learning experiences. The professional learning approach is really meant to support teachers in taking up key components of the Reading Apprenticeship framework and making them come to life in their classroom. So it's providing opportunities to recognize and model for students the reading strategies that we as expert readers use. It's helping us to engage students in the power of metacognition, to integrate and accelerate students' subject area learning and their literacy simultaneously. We also really provide a wide range of supports about fostering those key learning dispositions of persistence, problem solving, and collaboration. And finally, our work really is designed to turn the sustained work of learning back to our students. There are many kinds of supports for effective implementation. First and foremost, literacy is not only the job of the English language arts teacher. That person can help a student understand that poem that flashed across your screen. However, the CTE teacher is probably going to need to support students in learning how to read code for a computer program. We also work closely with school and district leaders to provide time and space for teacher leaders to build the expertise to support their colleagues. We provide coaching to teachers as they begin to take things on. We create cross-school opportunities for teachers as they begin to implement reading apprenticeship to share practices with teachers in similar schools. And finally, we really set an agenda of ongoing learning. I'd like to turn now to two examples, of reading apprenticeship in action on a more systemic level. So the first is environmental charter schools, and we started working with Inglewood Middle School, one school in this charter network, in 2015, and just a very small team of teachers participated in our professional learning. That team saw amazing growth on state standardized ELA scores in 1 year, 20%. Because of that success, the ECS decided to gradually engage additional teachers, and in 2018-19 invested in engaging all of their reading apprenticeship teachers in reading apprenticeship professional development. And they also included all of their administrators and academic leaders. Reading apprenticeship has become an anchor for ECS's interdisciplinary approach to teaching and learning. And as part of that approach, they have identified an assistant principal in each school who serves as a reading apprenticeship facilitator and uses these practices for professional learning and as they coach and work with teachers. Danielle Kelsick is now the Chief Academic Officer at ECS, and she was recently selected to be an Ed Week Leader to Learn From. And the article explaining this talked about a particular moment. In a recent reading apprenticeship training session, staff asked, "Are we preparing students to test well and succeed in college, or are we preparing them to think critically about society?" To me, it's not a dichotomy, Kelsick said. The path to critical thinking is interdisciplinary instruction. And in this way, Kelsick really emphasizes the important relationship between equity outcomes and anti-racist work and the core work of reading and reading complex texts as an equity issue. So, as we all know, sometimes there are students who come to us who need additional support. As part of IES's Enhanced Reading Opportunities Study from 2005 to 2008, we tested the Reading Apprenticeship Academic Literacy course plus professional learning to see whether that could have an impact for students. 34 schools in 10 districts participated, and we focused in on that critical 9th grade transition year and those students who were 2 to 5 years below grade level. The impact of the curriculum plus professional learning was positive and statistically significant in terms of reading comprehension. And the students in that study had an effect size equivalent of 63% improvement over and above what would have been expected. 2008 was quite a long time ago at this point, so you might wonder what's happening now. Since 2018, we have been partnering with the Washington County Public Schools in Maryland, and they have taken a very strategic approach to implementation. When they started working with us, much like ECS, they started with a very small team in one high school, and they called it a pilot. They wanted to see, will this course plus professional learning work for us and our students and help us with the tremendous reading challenges that our students face? So they identified a small cohort of ninth graders who were reading well below grade level. They engaged their subject area teachers in reading apprenticeship professional learning, and they set up an intervention course, reading apprenticeship for academic literacy. And that pilot was successful. As Jody Smith, their secondary literacy achievement coordinator, states, for the first time, some kids felt a sense of accomplishment, maybe even smart. And so out of that, they really have started to grow the program. And now I'd like you to hear from the voices of the students and teachers in Washington County.
I just dislike books. I didn't get entertained by them.
I didn't want to do it because I really didn't enjoy reading.
It was hard. I used to just wanted to stay with picture books and a bunch of words in it.
In Mrs. Hambrick's science class, the lesson may be about force and motion, but the real science behind what students are learning begins with reading. These students are part of the Reading Apprenticeship, a concept created by WestEd.
They put together a series of strategies that are used with students to help them comprehend text that they're reading.
Now in its second year at South High, these freshmen in the Reading Apprenticeship have been putting those strategies to use since the beginning of this school year.
Kids are taught that it's okay to have those conversations about what they're reading, and it's okay if you don't understand every single word.
The success after just 1 year astounded educators, with 87% of students demonstrating growth in their reading, some of them improving as much as 3 grade levels.
Scanner Dime would read this and I'm okay, so I read it and it just kept me entertained to it, and so I just kept reading.
These lessons go beyond English language arts, with social studies, science, and even math teachers guiding students to use the strategy.
The lab that I'm going to do anyway, that's reading. How do you analyze it? The word problems that we do, that's still reading because you have to approach those differently than you do a fictional text or something like that. So it's still reading. It's just not what I typically thought of as reading.
And the success at South High is transcending reading abilities. Teachers are seeing other positive changes in their students.
What we're really doing in the classroom is building reading communities. So what we're seeing is that students are responding to text academically, but they're also creating reading communities that are beneficial once they leave the classroom. So they're talking about books more just for the enjoyment, or they're talking about problems they're seeing in books that, can help them with the problems they see in their own lives.
Now students are equipped to overcome challenges in the text, and they're reading in transformative ways.
In middle school, we had to do a lot of reading, and I used to just sit there. Now I'm engaged.
It changed my life. I feel more confident about reading.
In addition to those powerful impacts on students' readers' identity, Washington County has also seen positive impacts on reading scores. So over 3 years, about 311 students have participated in the Reading Apprenticeship course plus having their core content teachers trained in reading apprenticeship strategies. The average entering score of those students was 623 Lexile points. And in general, Washington County expects their middle and high school students to gain about 50 points per year. The results have been quite powerful. 95% of the students showed growth as measured by the electronic reading inventory. The average growth was 258 Lexile points, so quite a lot more than the 50 points that's expected. And the range of growth, admittedly, was from 9 to 884 points. So some students were not making full grade level growth, but the majority were. And English learners and students with disabilities were also growing in their reading. So this suggests that this approach of metacognition and building up those social emotional dimensions plus the academic literacy dimensions can be a very powerful approach. So what does this mean for our classrooms? Metacognitive conversation is at the heart of reading apprenticeship. And the question that I would pose to all of you is, what can you do to turn over the hard work of learning to your students? And here are some high-level things. First, turning the tables. Value that process of learning in addition to valuing the products of learning. It's that process that can really help us understand where our students actually are. Normalizing struggle. It is okay to be confused and to not know words. We as teachers and adults, learners can model that for our students and demonstrate how we work through that. Creating and supporting opportunities to engage with challenging advanced literacies in our disciplines. Building collaborative opportunities for students so that they are engaged and they are doing the work of learning. And finally, engaging in metacognitive inquiry and text-based conversation. All of this together can form an apprenticeship for our students. We have a variety of additional resources on our website, which you can find the link here. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Samantha Berg, and Linda, have to tell you, I totally enjoyed that presentation, especially those videos that you showed, the one about the science class, reading the article, and I loved that last study and how many kids said that reading. So we want to open it up, Linda, and see what everybody else, the other attendees thought or what questions they have for you. So please feel free to, okay, we have a question. Just an organizational one. Can you please put up the last slide with the website listed? Okay.
And
Linda,
I've already added it to the chat.
Man, you're so on top of this, Linda. That's awesome. All right. Any other questions or comments people would like to ask? I mean, there's so many intriguing things here. Well, so Linda, one of the other things I was thinking about is, can you talk a little bit more about the kinds of effective skills that teachers need to help students build in order to succeed at that complex disciplinary reading?
Yeah, that's a great question, Samantha. We have really found that it really does start with the teachers first and their own reading in the disciplines. And sometimes that's a little challenging because when we're reading those texts in our classroom that we're so familiar with, it's really hard to see what are the things that we struggle with because we no longer struggle with them. So in the professional learning, we give teachers an opportunity to read some things outside of their disciplines. And sometimes that's a pretty uncomfortable experience that all of a sudden we're encountering questions that like, wait, I actually really don't understand that. And one of the slides that I flashed through at the beginning was a scientific abstract from a study that was outside my field. And I know that I, as a reader, when I encountered that text, really had to stop and struggle and think through, I don't understand that language. What is it that what connections am I making to background knowledge I bring? How do I break down those sentences and words? And so first through understanding that, and then thinking about how can I support students in becoming word detectives, becoming sentence detectives, using metacognition to really slow down our reading process to say, oh, not that I got through all these pages really quickly, but to stop and recognize, oh, I'm actually having a challenge.
Excellent. Thank you, Linda. That is very helpful. And I like that word detective and sentence detective. That's always that's a good thing to remember.
I wish I could take credit with it. That's really work that we've developed from Reading Apprenticeship over the years.
Nice, nice. Okay, we have a few more minutes. Do we have any other questions from people? Please feel free to insert those into the chat. Yeah, we've got Linda and her undivided attention right now. So let's pick her brain on some stuff. Well, I hope, Linda, this means that people are taking down that website and are going to be trolling through that. And oh, okay. So we have a question here from Robin. She says, with metacognitive conversation being at the heart of the reading apprenticeship, do teachers wonder what metacognition is or ever have questions about metacognition? And how would you explain that?
That's a great question, Robin. So yes, teachers, I think, do come to us with questions about what metacognition is. And we really address that in several ways. We explain it at a very simple level about this is what happens inside your head when you're reading, and sort of paying attention to that. And it really ranges from pausing and saying, I realize I'm having a struggle with this text. It is also the kinds of connections that we make to other kinds of background knowledge that help us make sense of a text. So that study that I was referencing, where I really wrestled with the abstract, as I looked at some of the things as a social scientist, I began to understand, oh, these are some of the same kinds of processes that I use when I'm trying to understand the impact of the professional learning that we're doing. Students might make connections, as we saw in that video, to the kinds of things they were learning in their science class. We saw them talking about DNA. So they were clearly bringing that background knowledge. It's the kinds of questions that we bring. And so in our professional learning, we model that. We share a lot of these kinds of classroom videos. We share samples of student work where students are using their metacognitive processes to break down words. And then the conversation part really comes in that social interaction. So we don't stop with just what's inside an individual's head, but the conversation part is about the classroom and those small and whole group conversations where students and teachers are sharing their processes and strategies and depth of questions with each other.
Excellent. I think we have time for one more question. And this comes from Wanda. And she asks if the Reading Apprenticeship has experimented with inquiry charts incorporating anchor text.
Yeah, that's a great question, Wanda. So one of the things that we do is you notice the teacher documenting her own and students' thinking on the reading. We also create a variety of charts and chart students' thinking. So I think that's a little bit parallel to those inquiry charts so that students' processes are always recorded and available as part of the classroom. We are at time, and it looks like Samantha's video froze. So thank you all so much for joining the conversation today. And please feel free to reach out with any additional questions. And we've posted a variety of resources on the website. Thank you again for your time.